Salams from the People's Dispatch studios in New Delhi. I'm Siddhantani. You're watching Daily Debrief. On the show today, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has invoked the Emergencies Act. The European Union continues to block TRIPS waivers on COVID-19 vaccines, and we talk about the United States' missile defense program. First up, like I just said, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau on Monday invoked the Emergencies Act to be used for the first time in the country in a bid to end the anti-vaccine mandate protests taking place across the country and blocking parts of its capital, Ottawa. Trudeau on Monday said that the protests and blockades were harming Canada's economy and putting the safety of the public at risk. A small group of truck drivers, calling themselves the Freedom Convoy, have been protesting vaccine and quarantine mandates to cross the land border with the United States. The protesters quickly became the darlings of the far right, even as a majority of Canadian truckers have distanced themselves from it. As per reports, around 90% of truckers in Canada are vaccinated against COVID-19. Anish joins us now for more on this story. Emergency powers, Anish, for the first time in Canada. What does this give Trudeau and the federal government sort of the ability to do to put an end to this?
So yeah, Siddhant. So when we look at this act, it's kind of it gives the government a lot of sweeping powers to investigate and prosecute anybody that they want to, that they think will be against public order. Now, this particular emergency invocation was done in the name of, deteriorating public order, which ideally should be times when it actually threatens the state's security and threatens the government's stability. But right now, there are quite a lot of criticisms against the government, primarily because of the history behind this law. In its previous version, when it was called the War Measures Act, it was invoked once before by Trudeau's father, Pierre Trudeau, in 1970 when the October crisis happened in Quebec, and it was widely criticized at that time because of the kind of crackdown it happened on not just militant Quebecoid militants, separatist militants, but also against anybody who was talking about greater autonomy for Quebec or even independence, even if they were not associated with the terrorist organization at that point. Right. So in that sense, you are looking at a law that has been invoked at a time when it was not really necessary. What we're looking at is a kind of right-wing upsurge, which could have been dealt with existing laws, and that is something that a lot of progressive factions and civil rights groups have pointed out repeatedly, even though the government and its kind of support group right now, the New Democratic Party, which is kind of left-leaning social democrats, have also supported this measure. You have civil society groups pointing out that all measures were not exhausted in dealing with this situation. You're talking about, for instance, hate crime laws could have been used to deal with many of these protesters, because there were very well documented instances of hate crimes, attacks on minorities, racial slurs being used by many of these protesters. So you have situations like that. There could have been, bringing together of law enforcement forces. The state of Ontario had also declared emergency, which was a state-level emergency, which could have brought in the RCMP. So measures were not completely exhausted before this kind of law was brought in. And the biggest fear by everybody is that it kind of also gives the government for the next 30 days powers to deal with anybody. Right. And now, while there have been assurances given by the government, we have seen that the government has used kid gloves when dealing with these protesters. Right now, they're talking about, even though they're talking about freezing accounts and tracking down the kind of international donors that have come through for these protesters, we are also looking at, without the emergency powers, the government cracking down on indigenous protesters or protesters, who were trade unions, or for that matter, protesters who were talking about civil rights for racial minorities. So this is something very new. and it actually kind of brings in a sort of a chilling effect in many ways to civil liberties in Canada.
Perhaps also indicative of the kind of political pressure that Trudeau is facing to be seen as having taken some action or being actively involved in diffusing the crisis. But Anish, we've reported on this before. Just a quick recap for our viewers who might have missed it. What is so problematic about this protest, which is it's kind of been masqueraded as this thing of freedom convoy and legitimate protests of working people, but it is far from that.
Of course, as we can see, data shows, and even none of the major truckers unions have support. Not even major, like even local ones have not come out in support of these protests. Not only that, you have very clear linkages with extreme right-wing groups who have, you have seen Confederate flags in Canada, for instance. You see, the Nazi swastikas all over the place. You see, even appropriation of indigenous symbols and drumming and all sorts of other rituals in not a very, sensitive manner, so to speak, just to put it very gently. And also you have seen, as I said, like attacks on minorities have been reported. A lot of people were injured. And in these cases, the government has been very reluctant to do anything about this. Not just the federal government, but also the state government in Ontario. And that shows, and we have also seen police or parts of the law enforcement agencies being complicit, and or if not complicit, but at least turning a blind eye, not doing enough to actually prevent them from blocking. There have been ex-policemen, ex-servicemen who have joined the protest, have also created, networks, and not just networks, even security details for these protesters. So in these cases, almost nothing was done, even when millions of dollars have poured into these accounts. These could have been easily dealt with before emergency powers could have been invoked, but again, that was not done. So it is at this point when it is actually threatening major trade routes, when it is threatening the economy, when it is threatening big businesses, that the government comes out to do something about it. And it still is not going to address the key issues of, institutionalized racism, the right wing's infiltration into their systems, into law enforcement agency. None of that will be obviously addressed. So it remains to be seen how the government really thinks that this could actually help it not only shore up support, but also deal with these right-wing extremists right now.
Right, thanks, Arish. We'll ask you to keep tracking that story for us as it unfolds. Next up, the European Union continues to block proposals from African nations for trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights waivers on COVID-19 vaccine technology, which will allow the African Union to develop vaccine production capabilities on the continent itself, thereby, of course, easing access to vaccines for everyone who lives on the continent. The deadlock continues as the EU and AU meet in Brussels today and tomorrow. According to the People's Vaccine Alliance, the EU will trash 55 million vaccine doses by the end of the month. That's far more than the 30 million doses they have sent to Africa so far this year. For more on this, I spoke earlier to People's Dispatch's Abdul. Right, Abdul. So the People's Health Movement criticizing the EU's approach to the proposal by the African Union for a TRIPS waiver regarding COVID-19 vaccine. We know that very small numbers of people on the continent are actually vaccinated. Just tell us what is the critique, and also the critique of the way forward or the alternative that has been proposed by Europe.
We all know that there is a huge gap when it comes to vaccination in the world. The poorer nations versus the rich, there is a clear-cut divide. Some of the activists have called it vaccine apartheid as well. So, for example, in Africa, the total number of people who have got double doses of vaccine is max 12%, 12 to 13%. Whereas it is in European countries, it is more than 70%. So this huge gap, the People's Health Movement and other health activists are saying, is primarily because the vaccine producers acting with the objective of profit maximization has kind of controlled the overall production of vaccine, and there is a lack of enough vaccines. So the only way to increase the number of vaccines for everyone is to basically liberalize the production, which can only happen if the patents related to the vaccine production go. This debate is going on for last 2 years. But what has happened that apart from the US, among all the major economies, none of the others, particularly the European Union and the UK, have not agreed to this. Their argument is this will compromise the newer initiatives. This will hamper the efforts made by the people who invented their time and energy in inventing the vaccines. And so this is a lone argument which is going on for last 2 years, which does not make sense today, for example, because the People's Health Movement and other health activists are arguing that the vaccine companies have earned enough profit in last 2 years. And according to their data, they are earning on every dose $1,000 per dose, per second, the profits they are making. So they have earned enough profits that it has enough time have lapsed. Now, though it is late, it should be good that the TRIPS patent waivers are agreed. But the French and France and Germany, they do not agree with the proposal yet. Instead, they're proposing more funding to the African countries, helping them build health infrastructure so that more vaccines can be stored. They're also basically promising more vaccine doses to them. But the health activists are saying the maximum the doses given to Africa and poorer countries are basically the doses which are on the verge of expiry date. And therefore, most of them become unusable after, even if they are given. And they have also critiqued the other alternative which is there in existence called COVAX, the vaccine sharing initiative, which has miserably failed to deliver on its mandate. So it had a mandate to deliver 1.8 billion doses by the end of 2021. They have not delivered even half of it. And most of the doses which they have delivered are unusable because of the expiry date and so on and so forth. So the ultimate pressure, which is EU and African Union summit, which is ongoing now, today and tomorrow, is basically the health activists and African countries are forcing the European Union to basically agree for TRIPS waiver.
If I may, very quickly, we don't have too much time, but very quickly, the WTO is also set to meet, and South Africa and India have put forward a similar proposal along the same lines at the WTO. What is the sort of likelihood of discussions to progress on that front when that meeting happens?
It is very unlikely that the WTO will agree because UK and, as I said before, UK and European Union have completely said no to any such proposal so far. So even if US agrees, we are not sure how much conviction is there in that agreement. So let's see what happens in the WTO meeting. For as if now, there is not much hope.
Thanks, Abdul, for that update. A report by the American Physical Society's Panel on Public Affairs, whose members include academics connected with major universities in the United States, including MIT, Princeton, and the Los Alamos National Laboratory, as well as independent consultants, contains some hard-hitting facts about the United States' missile defense program. For more on the report and the wider conversation around it, Newsclick Editor-in-Chief Prabir Purkayastha is with us now via our magic chair. Prabir, if you will, summarize for us, please, what this report says.
Well, the report has looked at a very, shall we say, conservative approach, saying, okay, let's take the simplest case possible. North Korea, not China, not Russia. They are too far advanced in missiles.
Right.
So let's take a much simpler case and see whether the anti-missiles, so to say, can at least deal with that. And even there, they have pared it down to, again, say 10 nuclear missiles if they are launched. Can we stop 10 of them? if not 10 of them, at least of one of them. And their argument after doing this entire exercise is that they cannot. And this, they say, it's not just for today. This is for next 15 years. The American technology will not be able to do it. And this, even if we take into account that North Korea will not improve its missiles, will not do certain things which missiles can do, and they have the capability of doing it even now, but not maybe for the ballistic missiles, the long-range ballistic missiles. But for instance, evasive tactics, they also, changing directions at a later moment, decoys that they can use during flight. So all of this, even if you assume that North Korea doesn't use any of that, even then, their calculation is even if 10 missiles are launched, assuming that North Korea will not have more than that, that even that cannot be stopped. So I think that's a very important conclusion. And this is after the US has spent something like $350 billion over the number of years, of course, to develop anti-ballistic missiles. Even last year it had a very fat budget for anti-ballistic missiles. And it has, I think one of the generals in the congressional hearings said that he believes with 100% guarantee that North Korean missiles will be able to stop, may not be others, but North Korean missiles, yes. And what this report punctures that belief that this is possible. Now, if we add, as I said, evasive measures which are rather simple, which can be done by anybody, then of course, even this limited approach that the Americans have, what the Physical Society's report says, even that is, is far beyond the capabilities. Even the simplest ones are not possible to stop. So, argument is, and this is what the Physical Society's report says, that this is a no-brainer, that we should return to essentially not doing anti-missiles, anti-ballistic missiles. We should come to the agreement which the United States had walked out, the ABM treaty, and also, therefore, look at if mutual assured destruction is going to be what nuclear weapons mean, then think about not doing it any further. I think all of this are implicit. We had a very technical language this particular report uses.
All the more interesting, I guess, because looking at the panel or the study group that has produced this report, it seems like there's an establishment involvement in it. It's not something that is completely sort of independent or coming out of left field or anything like that. But how does this lead us into the wider question, which the report says it doesn't address, but like you said, is between the lines, of a diplomatic solution that achieves this long-term peace against nuclear?
You see, the first is the acceptance that anti-ballistic missiles don't work. That's really the fundamental issue that has to be addressed. And if you remember, when the Star Wars scenario had unfolded under Ronald Reagan in the 1980s, it was the scientific establishment, again, the establishment, which went on to say that, look, these are pipe dreams. There is nothing that we can do or think of doing in the near future that will lead us anywhere near what you are saying. Here also, they have considered basically space-based missiles, anti-missiles, to take out missiles that the North Korea may fire. And again, they said it will require literally hundreds of such batteries to be posted. And even then, we will not be able to stop even a single one. So this whole to access the cost and the benefits show that the benefits are marginal, if any, against the most primitive missiles, and the costs are enormous. So these are the two things, because missile trajectory has three parts to it. Initial phase where it's slow and hot. Next is where it is really the mid-range of it, when it's much more difficult to track it or hunt it down. And then the final last bit, where you then know which target it's going to hit, and you try and take it out there. All three are difficult, and the only possibility is the beginning phase. That they said is not really possible. But what is interesting, as you said, it is of course the establishment, but the science establishment, not the military establishment. That is important. But it's also interesting what they have said with regard to other claims, which also we hear. They said, let's take the two other supposed success, the Patriot missiles and the Iron Dome. So the Iron Dome is dealing with extremely primitive missiles, and even then, its success rate is 90%. For nuclear bombs, well, 90% success rate doesn't work.
Doesn't mean
Out of 10, one will get through. So that is one. And the second is the Patriot missiles, which it's quite surprising for most viewers to know that with the Scud missiles, one of the most primitive missiles at that era that Iraq had fired, he said they hardly stopped one or two. Though, if you remember, we had these pictures
the
of
visuals
showing that
on-
how Scud missiles were being taken out and so on. They were actually not true. They were actually the anti-missiles bursting, but not really taking down
the target.
anything. And this is what this report also says. We have known it, but as I said, the Americans saying it at an official body of some, but apparently the congressional reports already indicate that this is true and this was accepted. But at that time, we only remember the television pictures which said the success of the Patriot batteries over Israel.
Yeah, narrative versus reality. Thanks so much, Prabir, for that. That does it for this episode of Daily Debrief from myself and the entire People's Dispatch team. Thanks very much for watching. You can get more on all of these stories from our website, peoplesdispatch.org. And also, please follow us on social media for updates. We'll be back tomorrow. See you then. Goodbye.